Happy holidays and an almost happy new year as we're very, very close to the end of 2020. This is another edition of From the Other Side here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And this, of course, also to be posted at WV Sports Now. So expect it on PSL and WV Sports Now, as many programs who've had similar seasons are done with their college football season. But the West Virginia Mountaineers, and that even includes two others that we cover throughout the Now family of networks, but the West Virginia Mountaineers still have one more to go, as WVU has agreed to play a bowl game. Neal Brown wanted those couple weeks of practice and to have one more game, which will be his first bowl game as head coach of the West Virginia Mountaineers, and actually his first bowl game as a head coach of a major program coming from Troy. The Mountaineers accepting their invitation to the Liberty Bowl. So the 5-4 Mountaineers, who did not get to finish out their year with another game against Oklahoma, that got scrapped. My preview show, my From the Other Side for that one, got scrapped. But WVU nonetheless will take on now Army in the Liberty Bowl. Army 9-2. And for those who've been paying attention and those of you who have not been living under a rock, Army was not the first choice for the Liberty Bowl. This originally was West Virginia versus Tennessee, which was a game we saw a couple years ago and does have some history there with two long tenured programs who've accomplished a lot of victories throughout college football history. But nonetheless, Tennessee could not go because of COVID, of course. Another opponent bites the dust from the Mountaineers because of the pandemic, and Army steps up. And honestly, I will tell you here, and again, I'm Mike Asti here on this From the Other Side edition on Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now. I'm thrilled to see Army in this game. I was flat out upset when they weren't going to be in a bowl game. I know they were too. Thought it was a screw job, so I'm thrilled Army was there. I said they should have been the choice from the jump when Tennessee was bumped out, so I'm glad that they were. I know Neal Brown agreed with me and some others from national media really clamoring for Army to get in there. It appeared it wasn't even necessary. Army was picked right away, almost an hour and a half later, it felt like. So Army is the team, WVU-Army in the Liberty Bowl, and I will be joined by somebody familiar to us here at the Now Network, Mitchell Northam, who is a stringer for us at Pittsburgh Sports Now, also does digital content at North Carolina Public Radio, and, of course, covered the Service Academy teams throughout SB Nation. So, Mitchell, first off, I definitely appreciate you jumping on here, and as I told you off the air, you seem like the perfect guy. We're already familiar here without the network, so you're the perfect guy to jump on and kind of preview this one. And I am thrilled to see this be Army and that they get a bowl game for a 9-win season, certainly deserving. And definitely appreciate the time. Happy holidays to you. So thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I know Army was pretty disappointed, that selection Sunday to get kind of cut out of the bowl picture. And I guess it was about 24, 36 hours later or whatever that they found themselves in the Liberty Bowl. And they sort of took on the mantra of we'll play anyone, anytime, anywhere. And sounds like that's going to be West Virginia and Memphis.
Yeah. Liberty Bowl, New Year's Eve, so December 31st, 4 p.m. on ESPN, the Mountaineers and Army. And I didn't get I already seen some memes and jokes galore about the only place in the country, the only opponent in the country that maybe could have inhabited more firearms with West Virginia. So that's all fun. It's also going to potentially be a fun game on the field. You can say what you want about Army's schedule, and it certainly wasn't the toughest in the world. To have 9 wins is still impressive. And the most notable game for them was probably a loss, but it was against Cincinnati. We know the success of the Cincinnati program this year, and it was certainly not a destruction. 24-10, Army was able to move the ball in that game. Cincinnati had to pull away towards the end. Kind of impressed early on. Army's not a team that's got tons of coverage. As I said, I'm glad to have you because it was tougher to find somebody to do this with in terms of covering the Service Academy teams who's notable. So they haven't received the coverage that most other programs would normally through a year. Nonetheless, 9-2. You get the wins over the other Service Academy teams, Navy, Air Force. I will say here I'm a good future son-in-law, getting my future father-in-law a nice little wood carving of the American flag with the Air Force logo as he's a veteran there. So I'll throw that up. So that's awesome. But nonetheless, in terms of Army season, were you expecting this? Are you surprised this was a 9-2 year? And how did this happen? Because Again, I feel like the From the Other Side series is almost the most important for this game, with it being Army, because there is not as much coverage for these Service Academy teams. So people may not realize this is a 9-win team. A victory, which is possible, could give Army a 10-win season, which we get. It's a 5-time national championship program, but the last one was in the late 1940s, so it's been a long, long time. A 10-win season for the Service Academy team these days would be ridiculously exceptional, especially during a pandemic season. So how did it happen, and in any way were you expecting this type of year?
Yeah, well, to start off, I think it was kind of a surprise. If you would have told me back in August that Army was going to win 9 games, I would have been surprised that they would have even played in 9 games.
Okay. True.
Because they pretty much, as an independent, sort of had to rebuild their schedule almost from scratch.
Air Force didn't. Air Force played 6 games.
Right. Yep. And Air Force, they're part of the Mountain West. So they sort of had some built-in insurances. If the Mountain West was going to play, Air Force would get some games.
Sure.
Navy sort of the same way, being in the American. But Army as an independent, they sort of sort things out on their own. In August, it got to a point where I think they had 3 games on their schedule because everybody – they had a couple games against the Army. Typically plays a lot of teams from the MAC. And the MAC, as we know, was one of those conferences that didn't start playing until late October,
right,
along with the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. I think they had 4 or 5 MAC games wiped off their schedule. They were supposed to host Oklahoma this year. That didn't happen because the Big 12 ruled out non-conference games,
sure,
playing those on the road anyways. And that was supposed to be a return game for a game that Army played at Oklahoma in 2018. They actually took Oklahoma to overtime in that one. They had to rebuild their schedule from scratch. And initially, they had Cincinnati and BYU on that schedule. Now, the BYU game didn't get played because of some COVID issues that BYU had. So their toughest game on that schedule from the outset, we knew that was going to be Cincinnati. But otherwise, once the schedule was actually built, it looked like a pretty winnable one for Army, one that they could have a lot of success with.
Right.
If you look at the schedule, there are 3 FCS opponents on there, and they did their job. They took care of business against the Citadel and Mercer and Abilene Christian. And then they, wiped out, Louisiana Monroe, Middle Tennessee State, just blew those teams out of the water. They did struggle a bit against Cincinnati, but if you look at the score, 10-24, it's actually the lowest amount of points in Cincinnati has scored this year.
It's not bad at all, I was going to say.
It's something you can hang your hat on, and really all season long, the defense has been the strong point for this Army team. I think Tulane is the only team that scored more than 30 against them. That was another loss. So there are 2 losses, Tulane and Cincinnati. But they really sort of, got back on track with these 2 Service Academy rival games that they hosted at West Point. Beat Navy 15-0, shut them out for the first time since the 60s, and beat Air Force 10-7. So the defense has been really strong for them this year. And I think you just have to give them, the academy in general, credit for being able to sort of rebuild the schedule on the fly. And challenge themselves a little bit, the Cincinnati game, like I said, and Tulane, and they had BYU on the schedule. Now, I think BYU would have beat Army pretty good, but it was there nonetheless. So.
Absolutely. You absolutely do have to give credit to not only any program that manages to get through a reasonable amount of games this season because of how difficult it was, but especially a Service Academy team where, again, I brought up the 5 national championships and the Heisman Trophy winners of the past, but likely that's never to happen again because of the system we have now today and the world we have today. And because these kids at these Service Academy teams, their number 1 priority is not football. Their number 2, 3, and 4 priority is really not football. So to manage all of those priorities and get football probably down number 10 or 11 in terms of the priority list, and yet win 9 games. The only real hiccup was that Georgia Southern game. They won 28-27.
Mm-hmm.
Glad Army won that game for them because a loss there might have made it potentially harder to get into a bowl game. Mississippi State was the other team they were selecting from to bump in with Tennessee being out. You have to wonder if Army would have dropped a bad loss, if that would have hurt Army. But nonetheless, I think Army also, I'm sure, I would hope, they got favor. And they didn't get in a bowl game prior because of the conference tie-ins. You mentioned Army not being in a conference this year. It was not as much as I was upset, and I'm sure you were, and we know Army was. I don't even have to ask you their opinions. It was publicly out there. Army felt like they were slighted, but contractually, that's the only negative of them being an independent. And I know most of the history of the program, they've been an independent except for the brief period in Conference USA, unlike you mentioned with Navy and Air Force. But by choosing to be an independent, and that's the way they like it, there are no conference tie-ins. So unless you dominate and there's some global pandemic to help you out, or you get a bowl game that really loves you, you can get screwed. And that was the case without the conference tie-ins that the other academies would have. So that was the case. But 9 wins, the Liberty Bowl wanted them. This seems like a solid matchup. So again, Mitchell Northam here, stringer with us at PSN, and also covering the Service Academy teams for SB Nation. Mike Asti here on our From the Other Side series on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And of course, WV Sports Now. It's the Liberty Bowl, the West Virginia Mountaineers and Army, 5-4 WVU versus Army, 9-2. Army, the better record. I don't know what they would have done in the Big 12 schedule. As you said, they would have had that game against Oklahoma. But nonetheless, the Mountaineers can beat anybody and lose to anybody, so nothing would shock me. I guess I just want to ask if you have any inside information, anything you were hearing from colleagues or even people that you talked to while covering this team when they were thinking they were not going to have a postseason. It's also different with Army, and we don't need to go to politics, but they certainly will have a belief one way. They really wanted to play the bowl game. That was publicly clear. So before they were selected, were there any conversations between Neal Brown and Army? Because Neal Brown was very public on Twitter about wanting Army to be the team. Several others in national media who I don't need to promote were willing to pay for Army to be in the game. Was Army aware of that? Was Army having any conversations with any of them? And if Army was not selected, was Army planning on throwing up another tweet in which they were going to yell at everyone? Or was Army just going to take this on the chin? Because obviously Army's not a program that likes taking things on the chin. And their opinions were very, very clear that they felt like they needed a postseason game to get that 10th victory.
Yeah, based on everything that I read, it seemed like Army. It seemed like they were set on playing in the Independence Bowl until the Independence Bowl canceled, and that happened on Sunday because Army has the one bowl that they have a contract with is the Independence Bowl played down there in Shreveport, Louisiana, and the other side of that contract is against a Pac-12 team. So because the Pac-12 largely decided they weren't going to play in any bowl games, the Independence Bowl didn't really have any options. They had to cancel. They couldn't find an opponent.
That's almost the worst conference tie-in during the pandemic because the Pac-12 was so progressive of not playing a season. They eventually were forced into it, but they also got the least amount of games by many of the major conferences.
Yeah, so I think once it became clear that the Independence Bowl wasn't going to be an option and Army was sort of going to have to kind of forge its own path, that's when they kind of went out to sort of tell their own story. They took to Twitter. They,
I love it.
Jeff Monken did that interview with ESPN. He did an interview with Dan Patrick. Basically, like I said, putting it out there that they'll play anyone, anytime, anywhere. Just give us a call. We want to play in a bowl game. Army was the first FBS team this year to commit to playing in a bowl game. When they beat Mercer, they were 6-1. And the Independence Bowl was like, cool. Guess you guys are coming this year. And they're like, yeah. So
they probably thought we need to get in a game because of this issue.
So they committed. They've always wanted to play in a bowl game, and I think for Army, well, for any of the service academies, but particularly Army this year because they do have this record and they should be in a bowl game. I think the athletic director and Jeff Monken both feel like for most of these seniors on this football team, this is the last time they'll ever play any sort of competitive football. After this bowl game, they go on and they go into their service and they're in that for a long time. Our Army has a guy here and there every now and then that makes it into the NFL or whatever, but for the most part, this bowl game against West Virginia, it's the last time they'll put on pads and helmet and play in a competitive football game. So I think that was a reason why it was very important for Army to get into a bowl game. The other thing is like they're an independent. They want to expand that national brand, when it comes to recruiting, that sort of thing. And they do, despite the, kind of soft schedule that they have in the midst of this pandemic, they do want to get the opportunity every now and then to challenge themselves against these Power 5 teams, like a West Virginia, or like I said, they were supposed to play Oklahoma this year. Last year they played Michigan. Next year, I think they have a Power 5 on the schedule. I know they have a future agreement with LSU. So they want to roll the triple option out there and see what they can do against some of these Power 5 teams. Like I said, it took Oklahoma to overtime 2 years ago. So it was very important for them. I'm not sure what conversation sort of took place behind the scenes, if there was anything between Jeff Monken and Neal Brown. But Neal Brown, I saw on Twitter, seemed very excited to to get Army in that game. It seemed like, from everything that I read, that the moment the news broke that Tennessee was out, it seemed like Army was on the phone with the Liberty Bowl folks. So you got to give credit to the athletic department and Mike Buddy there.
I think the very least, if there were not conversations behind the scenes, Army benefited from a lot of public pressure, because I feel like and this honestly is part of Neal Brown doing this, when you have a major program head coach coming out there publicly, especially one who's only been at his program for 2 years. Neal Brown, very, very vocal, but this is his first winning successful season with the Mountaineers. Last year, we know what it was. It's only his second year at WVU. So for him to be so vocal and to say I want Army when they didn't have an opponent, maybe Mississippi State could argue that was a slight to them, but very vocal in wanting Army. And then again, the national conversation about wanting Army and national networks like ESPN, who televising the game, willing to do the car wash with Army's head coach, getting the Black Knights that public, that national recognition that they don't get, as we talked about, with as much coverage throughout a year as maybe some other programs, even lesser programs, less successful. That's big. I think it would have looked bad if WVU is sitting there wanting to play, doesn't have an opponent, and either has to scrap a season in which they clearly want to play a bowl game and the bowl game forced to not have one, or they pick somebody outside of Army when Army has 9 wins. And as we mentioned, yes, the schedule was not that great because you get the service victories over Navy, over Air Force, but those are 2 programs that I believe both won 3 games apiece. So they combined for less wins than Army. Those games were not in doubt and shouldn't have been in doubt. You lose to Cincinnati despite a competitive game. There's no real major win. If this was a committee selecting something, they probably wouldn't have been impressed with Army's schedule. But as far as independents go, because Notre Dame was in a major conference this year because of the pandemic in the ACC, as we know, they were 3rd. Behind Liberty with the success they had this year. Again, say what you want about their schedule. And then BYU. So it would have been interesting if they could have played BYU this year, because that could have even affected the standings as far as independents go if they would have played that game. And you never know. We've seen crazier upsets happen. So you never know. And again, I am certainly not willing to go out on the line here and tell anybody they should be laying any money down on the Mountaineers dominating any game, because that is just not the Mountaineer way right now these last few years. So this might even be a good matchup for Army, as we'll get into this year. Mitchell Northam, a PSN stringer of ours and also covering the Service Academy teams for SB Nation, joining me to preview the Liberty Bowl. Army gets in a bowl game. The Black Knights will have a postseason, looking for that 10th win. You almost hate to see them not get it in a way, as historic as that will be for this program in the special year that is 2020 here, as they will face the 5-4 West Virginia Mountaineers. Now, Mitchell, getting into the game, because whether it was public pressure, whether they certainly, I believe, deserve it despite no tie-in that was available, whether it was a conversation with Neal Brown or ESPN or whatever it was, they're there. Liberty Bowl. In fact, you could argue they got into a better bowl game with more history. They actually may have benefited from this game, and a Liberty Bowl win might mean something more than an Independence Bowl game would have meant, because they're just almost kind of thrown in there as an independent when Liberty's not normally good, and Notre Dame usually wants bigger than that. Right. So that's normally their bowl game if they have the chance. This could be more for them. But style of play, what should Mountaineers fans expect from Army? Just looking at the box score, you can kind of easily tell this is not a team that is going to have an aerial assault. The Mountaineers secondary probably will have a day off. This is probably going to be about the defensive line, which might be difficult for Army. You're talking about the Stills brothers and the success of WVU's defensive line. That is the main success of the Mountaineer defense. This is an Army team that if they're going to score, they want to run. Going to the Navy game, it was almost 100% on the ground in that victory. You talked about Army's defense. What should Mountaineer fans expect out of Army in this game? And how do you think they actually match up with this Mountaineer team that's been a roller coaster ride, does have 5 wins, dealt with COVID a lot, better defense despite controversy in the offseason than some would have expected, inexperience otherwise on the offense, but Letty Brown kind of the standout?
Yeah, I think, you're going to see, like you said, you're going to see an Army team that's going to run a whole lot. This is a triple option team. They're not going to try and get fancy. They are, a lot of this year, triple option teams, they do have some wrinkles to them. Do they do a lot of stuff with fullbacks? Do they, do a lot of misdirections? Do they hand it off to the slots a lot? Do they roll out and do some play actions with the pass? This is an Army team that leans on its fullbacks. Sandon McCoy and Jacoby Buchanan, those guys are just, that's sort of the bread and butter of this offense this year, is giving it to those guys on dives or even on the edge sometimes. So those are the two ball carriers that they'll lean on a lot. Sandon McCoy has 10 touchdowns this year. He's been very good as a goal line runner. And Jacoby Buchanan has kind of been their bell cow back, so to speak.
Okay.
They also like to get it out to Tyrell Robinson. He's their slot back. They like to get it into him in space. He can make some plays. He's averaging about, I think, 7 yards a carry. Sort of the question mark going into this game is going to be who starts at quarterback. Army's had a little bit of a quarterback carousel all season. They had Christian Anderson. He's sort of the veteran of the group. He's a junior. He started in last year's Army-Navy game. He began this season as the starter and played pretty well, but lost his job when he got hurt, basically. When he got hurt, they had Jamel Jones in there for a little bit. They had a kid named Cade Ballard, and they had a kid named Tyler, who started these past couple games, started against Navy, played really well. Started against Air Force and played well until he got hurt. He suffered a helmet-to-helmet hit in the second quarter. Jeff Monken said it's not a concussion. He actually practiced this past week. But in relief for him, Christian Anderson played pretty well against Air Force and guided Army to a win. So offensively, that's sort of what you got against Army. You got a run team. Again, I think against Air Force and Navy combined, they attempted 3 total passes. So, this is going to be
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, Tyler had a great game against Navy, but not through the air. Well, I guess percentage-wise, analytically, he was 1 for 1, 1,000% completion percentage for 28 yards, quarterback rating of over 335, but then most of that on the ground, 26, 96, a touchdown, and a 28-yarder. So many long-tenured Mountaineer fans, and the triple option not the same as the spread, they may have flashes of the Rich Rodriguez-style Mountaineers with a lot of quarterback sweeps and a lot of running from the quarterback with plays designed for the quarterback to run.
Yeah, there's a lot of designed quarterback runs. A lot of times, keepers on the option. Tyler, he's got over 100 carries this year. Right behind him is Jacoby Buchanan, that fullback I talked about.
Yeah.
And then, third in carries is the other quarterback, Christian Anderson.
It's going to be fun to watch this one, man.
The ball carriers on New Year's Eve there, it's going to be a lot of the quarterbacks and the fullbacks, and then every now and then they'll try to get it out to Tyrell Robinson. You might see a little Anthony Atkins mixed in there. He's another running back. And then every now and then, if they feel like they can catch a defense, kind of on their toes or slipping a little bit, they'll try to roll out and get, a 30-yard gain on a pass play to sort of set up a touchdown. So they'll try that every now and then if they feel like the defense is sort of closing in a little bit too much and trying to stack the box on them.
Sure. Now, I know when you do work for us, it's mostly covering the ACC and a pit opponent for PSN, but just what you know about college football and if you've ever caught the Mountaineers this year, do you expect the Mountaineers defense to allow that? What do you think Navy can do through the air against this WVU defense? Because despite the Mountaineers having a roller coaster ride of a season, I would say this is probably the toughest defense Army will be facing all year, maybe including Cincinnati. We know Cincinnati's had a great season overall, but that's mostly because of their offense. This was a WVU defense that was ranked number 1 in the country midway through the year.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really key for Army. I have watched a little bit of West Virginia, and I have been impressed with their defense. It's gonna be key for Army to control the ball and to control the clock if they want to pull off. It would be an upset for Army to win.
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly, despite the records and whatever, I think West Virginia is favored by a touchdown and a half or so. To pull off this upset, Army would have to control the ball. They can't turn the ball over, which they've done a pretty good job of. They've done a good job of not making those mistakes on offense for the most part.
Okay.
I would be sort of surprised to see them pass often in this game.
Over under on more than 2 passes. Are you over under on 2 passes? Because they've had 3 passes the last few weeks.
I think
a fair ask here.
I'm going to do a push on that. I think 2 is the right number.
Okay.
I think 2 is right. If you gave me 3, I'd take the under. I think you might see 2 or 3 passes. Now, if Army gets down by a bunch of points, then
it could be wild. Then
right, they might pull some stuff out. Put another quarterback in there who can throw it a little bit better or whatever. But yeah, I think our Army is going to have to be at their best to beat West Virginia, especially on offense. Now, defensively, I do like Army's defense. They're one of the best in the country this year under Nate Woody.
Right.
So we'll see what they can do against West Virginia's defense. Army's defense has been pretty opportunistic. They picked off Air Force 3 times in that game and got a couple key turnovers against Navy too. So that might be an area where if you can turn defense into offense, I think that'll help Army's chances.
We'll get to the keys here in a second to the game, but I will tell you from the West Virginia perspective, if Army wins this game, I almost guarantee Jared Daggie's been responsible for at least 2 turnovers. When the Mountaineers lost games this year, it was because he faltered. This is his first full season as a starter for a major program. You can say what you want about his homecoming to Lubbock, where that seemed like a whole different guy who maybe was mentally off because of the family atmosphere with the fans that were there. He literally knew them all personally, and just being back at home seemed to have him off his game. But even other games, when he makes mistakes, they've not been able to win games. He is young and every now and then is prone to turn the football over. They've been able to overcome it sometimes, but if Army would win, I'd imagine Jared Daggie's throwing a couple picks in the game. Obviously, when the Mountaineers have been at their best this year, it's been about Lady Brown on the ground. He has been the driving force of this team. And obviously the stars on the defensive line and their NFL success is already their main priority right now. But that's what guided this team to this point. So it might be different if they were there as well for Army. So we will definitely see. Knowing how the Mountaineers are built, though, and how inexperienced they are on offense, with Winston Wright being that receiver but still also trying to emerge, and Daggie being prone to interceptions, do you think Army's game plan is going to be where some defenses go into games, they want to stop teams, as you know? Other defenses go into games, the Steelers defense in particular, who I cover for Steelers now, they literally go into games wanting to create turnovers. Mm-hmm. Do you think the conversation right now for Army are more, we got to pick Jared Daggie off? They might even have a number up there and over under. We need to leave the game with 2 picks against Jared Daggie. If we don't get him, we're probably not winning. We're not going to stop this team. The Mountaineers are going to score, but we need to be ball hawks. Do you believe that's more of the strategy than figuring they're going to leave the game with only allowing 100 yards or something crazy defensively?
Yeah, I think that has to be the strategy. I think you have to go in trying to take the ball away from the Mountaineers. Like I said, the Army, their defense last season was not very good. So they brought in a new defensive coordinator. They brought in Nate Woody, who was previously with John Harbaugh in Michigan.
Okay.
Jim Harbaugh. Which one is it?
Jim Harbaugh's in Michigan. John Harbaugh's with the Ravens, yes.
Okay.
Jim Harbaugh's with Michigan right now. I could tell you that I believe he should be fired, but he's currently with Michigan.
So anyways, so Nate Woody, he comes to Army from Michigan. He was a defensive assistant there, and he kind of turned the unit around. They're second best in points allowed per game, second best in yards allowed per game, second best in first downs allowed. and they force about a turnover and a half a game. So I think the key is going to be for them to take the ball away for West Virginia and keep their offense off the field. So that's going to be on Army's offense some too, controlling the clock, running that clock out, with the ground attack, and just keeping that West Virginia offensive unit off the field, keeping that air raid on the bench. Right. I think that's going to be the key for Army's defense. And they have a couple playmakers on defense who are pretty good at, just making big plays and kind of turning the game in their favor and getting possession. John Radigan is a linebacker who's a Chuck Bednarik Award semifinalist. Marique Smith is probably the best pass rusher on the team. And last week against Air Force, he came up with the interception that kind of sealed the game. And Cedric Cunningham is a good guy in the secondary. He kind of had a game-saving tackle against Navy that, kept them out of the end zone. And he's come up with a couple plays this year as well. So, yeah, I think for Army, the strategy is going to be take the ball away rather than trying to contain West Virginia or stop them or, sort of a bend, don't break type of situation. I think it's just going to have to be take the ball.
Yeah, and I would say for the Mountaineers, it's establish the run early, probably get a lead early in this game, make it kind of intimidating for Army to try to come back, especially if you force them into being a passing team. If you force them into throwing more than 5 times because you have more than a touchdown lead going into the second half, it's probably over. And it would at least be easy for the Mountaineers to scheme against, and even if that's the weakness of their defense, it's something that Army does not do well or at least consistent throughout a year if they have to throw in bulk that often. So against any defense, certainly a defense of note, I'd imagine it would be a problem for Army if they have to throw in a double digits, even if they are trailing in this game. And it'll be interesting if they would even go into that strategy, or they would say, we still are going to run if we're down by a touchdown or so, because that's how we move the ball. So it'll be interesting to see if they would even try to pass, since that's not really what they do. Mitchell Northam here, a stringer with us at PSN, digital content producer with NC Public Radio, and also covering the Service Academy teams for SB Nation, as we are previewing WVU and Army, the Black Knights versus the Mountaineers in the Liberty Bowl, New Year's Eve, 4 p.m. kickoff, a little weird 4 p.m. kickoff there on ESPN Eastern Standard Time. Mike Asti joining you for PSL's and West Virginia Sports Now's From the Other Side series. It's the last one for a football season. The Mountaineers wanting the bowl game, accepting the bowl game, and then wanting Army to be the opponent once Tennessee could not. We know Pitt decided not to play. Penn State decided not to play. They wanted to have their Christmas. This also at least allows these two programs, because this is a New Year's Eve bowl game, to have had their holiday. They didn't have to have the game either on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day like a lot of these, I would say, minor bowl games usually are played. This is a weird one that's New Year's Eve because there's some history there. So kind of nice for both programs. Mountaineers only a 5-win season. Army a 9-win year, but coming out as an independent. Just to kind of wrap things up here, I want to discuss Army just as a program, because if you're looking at the history of Army and you don't understand college football at all, you're going to say it's one of the best programs ever. 5 national titles. They were certainly right there for a few others that they could have potentially won. We know the system and how they pick national championships has been all convoluted and controversial over the last 100+ years. There are teams that claim national titles that maybe they didn't really win, and asterisks on a few others, certainly at the time that Army won theirs. But Army actually could have claimed other ones. I mean, Army pretty much played this on the up and up, that they only are national champions when the AP and others forced them to be national champions. And Army has mostly been independent throughout the history of college football, except for a brief period with Conference USA. But any thoughts, because of how this shook out, that unless they had the national media fighting for them or having a head coach of an opponent that really wanted to play them, they probably would have got screwed this year. Air Force, Navy, they're in a major conference. Do you think any of this maybe could make Army reevaluate that maybe we'd be benefited to be back in a conference if things are realigned again as being predicted in 3 to 4 years? I'd imagine a couple 9-win, 10-win seasons, somebody would take them just for good faith, if nothing else, maybe Conference USA again. Is that something that you think would be advantageous, any benefit of the program to rediscuss, even though they like being independent? And separate from that, what is the mindset at Army? They know their history, the trophies are there, but do they ever want to try to get back to glory, or do they realize they're a ceiling for the program because their main focus is being a service academy and serving for the country? Or is there any thought that we got to get in this conference to then try to get in this other conference to try to fight for this? We're going to get into, we want to have these conversations. We want to be mad. We want to talk about these things. If the committee would expand the playoff, would that influence them even further, that they can maybe slide in there for a late selection if it ever gets to 16 teams? Or is that not their focus because they are Army?
I don't think so. Some of the service academies, when it comes to football, I think they have different goals.
Right.
So like Navy, for example, I think Navy wants to be in the national conversation. I think that's why they joined. You
Okay.
know, originally they were going to join the Big East. That became the American Athletic Conference. They want to play for conference championships. They want to be ranked in the AP poll. They
Right.
want a shot at these bigger. They want a shot at the New Year's Six Bowl. You know, New Year's
Yeah,
Six.
I guess that's where I'm going. That could be a
Right.
ceiling that's legitimately
And
attainable.
I think Air Force is sort of in the same boat. You know, if you're in the Mountain West and you're good enough, you get a shot at a good bowl game like that.
Right.
I think Army, because its experience with Conference USA went so bad about 20 years ago now, I think that soured a lot of people there on the idea of rejoining a conference. And that went bad for, you can debate for a lot of different reasons. You know, they didn't really have the right head coach at the time. You know, a couple other different reasons.
They also did it through September 11th. That was, well, I believe that was 98 to 2004. That's almost the worst period of time for Army to try to focus on football.
Yeah, it was just wasn't a good time for them to try and do
Right.
that. So I think, you know, now though that they've had this year where, like I said, back in August, they sort of had to just rebuild their schedule completely from scratch because they didn't belong to a conference. You know, if you're Navy or your Air Force, you sort of have some of your your schedule already built in for you. You know, you have guaranteed so many games. You know, Army did not because they're an independent. So I think that experience and maybe this experience just now of putting a 9-win team out on the field, but not getting guaranteed a bowl game, basically having to fight and do what you just had to do this whole past week,
Yeah.
get into a bowl game. I do wonder if it has made them sort of reconsider the idea of joining a conference, especially when you talk about there's that other conversation about, you know, if the playoff expands so much, if it gets to
Right.
16 teams,
Sure.
and you have, you know, Army a couple of years ago, that year that I talked about where they took Oklahoma to overtime, you know, that year they won 11 games and they spanked Houston in the Armed Forces Bowl. They hung 70 points on Houston.
Yeah.
So they were ranked, I think they were 22 or something in the country. You know, does that Army team, if they play in a conference and they take out 2 of those FCS games and replace them with, I don't know, teams against the MAC or teams against Conference USA, do they get ranked a little bit higher and do they have a shot at maybe a 16-team playoff if we get to that point somewhere down the road?
Right.
So I think, I think that's worth considering. I don't know.
Honestly, Cincinnati's schedule, UCF's schedule in 2017 when they went undefeated and kind of claimed their title, that whether we agree or not that they actually won, they only had one top 15 victory the whole year, and that's the bowl game against Auburn. They played a couple ranked teams in the top 25, Memphis being one of them, and they played them twice because of the conference tie-in. It's not like those schedules are brutally tough. That if they have that type of year like you're just describing with Army being 22nd in the country, I don't even think they would need to worry about 2 more MAC teams. I think, honestly, if they would schedule one average MAC team that year, and fair or not, they would go on the national media car wash and have people like us arguing for them because they're a service academy, they might get a bump to the final seed because they're Army and people want them and they like them. So it might not be that much they would need to do. And obviously they didn't expand the playoff this year, that you would think, well, if they didn't do it this year, they might never do it. It's not a 0% chance that it's going to happen at some point in the future. And even if they would only expand it to 8, because 16 seems like a distant dream, that could at least put them in line for a New Year's 6, and maybe some of those bowl games might be involved in that playoff. It's unlikely. I'm not going to put money down that they're going to win a national title in the next 50 years, but it could at least get them better bowl game tie-ins, at least more impressive wins. Even if they don't get in that conversation, they could jump into the Sun Bowl. You could be talking about a Gator Bowl. You could be talking about a Cotton Bowl every now and then. Those are some bowl games that depending on the conference tie-in, could be big deals to Army that they haven't even sniffed in our whole lifetimes.
Right.
And I don't think it's going to happen as an independent based on what we just experienced. I think Neal Brown being so vocal and others being so vocal did help Army. That they might not get that with every opponent, and they probably certainly would not have got that out of Pac-12 schools because of their COVID beliefs. Conversely, with Army, so
yeah. So, yeah, like I mentioned, it sort of comes down to what is important to the athletic department and to whoever is head coach of the football team at that time. I think it's different for the 3 service academies. Like I said, I think Navy wants to be in that national conversation, wants to be in that picture. I think for Army, I think they're the sort of program that they're kind of like, as long as we beat Air Force, as long as we beat Navy, as long as we go above 500 and in a normal year would kind of get that guaranteed tie into a bowl game, the Independence Bowl or whatever, and they play well there. I think they're happy playing, just playing in any bowl game. And as long as they, like I said, most important to them is beating Navy, beating Air Force, taking home that CIC trophy. But I do think that, they certainly, if the opportunity arose, if we have somewhere down the line in the next couple of years where there is some conference movement, some expansion, and maybe a spot opens up in the MAC or a spot opens up in Conference USA again, I think Army would consider it. I don't know if they jump right away. I say the MAC because that's the conference that I think year to year is the most easy to compare with the skill level that Army has and the skill level they put out. Like I said before,
they will get national recognition that's not there now.
Right.
They would get on those Tuesday, Thursday games occasionally, which isn't there now.
Right. Most seasons, Army schedules
Wednesday.
three or four MAC teams because of the regionality. They're close to, the Buffaloes and those schools like that. So they're not too far away from a lot of those MAC schools. So I think that's a place maybe that Army could end up. I don't know if it happens. If I were betting, I would bet that Army probably doesn't join a conference anytime soon. I don't think it's that important to them at this point, and I think that because that situation with Conference USA all those years ago went so bad, I think it's just soured a lot of people there on it. But I do think they would give it some thought now, considering what they just went through this year.
Yeah.
With having to rebuild their schedule and with having to do this whole, show and everything, put all this effort into just getting into a bowl game. I think they're going to reassess some things, and maybe it's not joining a conference, but maybe it's sort of having a couple insurance plans in place. Okay, if this bowl game fails, can we do a contract with this one? So I think they'll reassess some things going forward for sure. I don't know if that means joining a conference.
Yeah, it probably would be a benefit to them. It also may depend on what Notre Dame does. People think Notre Dame is going to eventually join the ACC full time. I'm skeptical of that, certainly, because of their NBC deal, but they were forced into it this year. If Notre Dame would ever say, we'll do it if somehow we can keep the NBC money, because I'm sure that's going to be part of it, maybe that would influence Army. Maybe that would even influence Army to say, no, then we're definitely not going to do it because now we can win the Independence. We can guarantee being in the Independence Bowl because we can claim we're winning the standings of the independent teams or whatever, figuring that Liberty and BYU fall off after now and then. So we'll see. It definitely was one of those that just it bothered me a little bit to see a 9-win Army team not in a bowl game for those 2 days. I know it bothered them. I'm glad that this is happening. For the program and what it could mean to Army, and that they were the only team that really, obviously the wins thing was gone because of COVID this year, but Navy won 3 games, Air Force won 3 games, Notre Dame was in the ACC, Liberty played a worse schedule really, and BYU had the season that they had, so they were taken care of. It would have sucked. This would have been bad. I think it would have been a black eye if Army was so vocal that they wanted to be in a bowl game. They didn't get in one when you have 2-win teams playing in bowl games. So yeah, I think that would have been absurd.
I think that was the big problem. Okay, maybe you could leave Army out if you didn't have all these sub 500 teams in
Right.
bowl. If you didn't have 2-8 South Carolina playing in the Gasparilla Bowl or whatever that is,
Yeah.
whatever Ole Miss's record is, or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you didn't have those sub 500 teams playing, then maybe there wouldn't have been as loud as an uproar of Army not getting in, considering the caliber of schedule they played. But because you have these other teams in, you have to find a spot for Army, I feel like, and I guess they felt the same way.
Yeah, and especially because this is a schedule that, unlike past years where the schedule is built in 3 or 4 years in advance, so if you have a younger head coach, he didn't do any of the work for the schedule. This was work to put this schedule together.
Yeah,
Arguably the most work. Yeah, arguably just as much work as coaching the team. This was putting in work.
Right.
And it's harder when you're a program like Army because teams, they may want to play you because they want to get the game in. But like the West Virginia Mountaineers going into this, if they lose to Army, it looks bad for a program trying to rebuild. If they beat Army, there's nothing to have a parade over because you should beat Army, even with their 9 wins. So that's the issue Army deals with in terms of scheduling these games. So honestly, props to Neal Brown in his first bowl game with a major conference team to be willing to do this, because they could lose and it will look bad, and it will look bad for him without even a big win as a VU head coach, but he's willing to take that risk to help Army out. So that I think that's nice. Mitchell Northam here, again, a stringer with PSN, digital content for North Carolina Public Radio, and also, of course, covering the Service Academy teams at SB Nation. Do you have a score prediction for us as we close up shop?
I think West Virginia wins, but Army covers the spread. I'll go. I think it'll be relatively low scoring for a West Virginia game. Okay. I will say 21-15.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like those weirdly, Army plays those odd number games, 15, 23,
maybe there's 30. A 2-point conversion or a safety rolled in there or something somewhere. So
I wouldn't even be surprised if Army forces into a 2-point conversion, they have maybe an early lead in celebration, and then West Virginia pulls away or something to that effect. I don't know. I probably would go West Virginia 23. Maybe 13 for Army, something like that. 12, maybe.
I think somewhere in the 20 and a teen mark sounds about right.
Yeah, I can't see WVU scoring 30 or more. I can't see them not at least scoring a couple touchdowns unless there's tons of mistakes, and maybe Army gets one. Maybe Army scores defensively. Maybe they're able to convert a mistake from Jared Dagey and run it back, or at least be really, really set up for a score. So who knows? I do actually hope it is a little bit of a game. We cover West Virginia here in WV Sports Now. It'd be nice for Neal Brown to really make a statement with this victory, especially after he fought to play this game. And I'm sure he wants a 3-touchdown victory to say, I wanted to play you, I helped you out, but I got to get a win for myself. Sure. But I think it'd be cool to have it be a little close. But they're going to have the toast of ESPN briefly get the national game that they would not otherwise get. So, again, happy for the Army program. Definitely appreciate the time for you joining me here day after Christmas. So happy holidays to you, and we will get to ring in the new year there on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. We just had Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve with Army and West Virginia in the Liberty Bowl. Again, New Year's Eve, 4 p.m. kickoff on the mothership there on ESPN. Army's in a bowl game. They actually fell into a better bowl game. So this is a trophy to put up. This is a trophy to put up there if they would somehow win this. And Neal Brown's looking for that first bowl win as Mountaineers head coach, first for a major conference team, although he coached Troy, so he knows this area that Army's fighting for just maybe as well as anybody, which might have made him why he was an advocate to Army to get in this game. And, of course, thanks to everybody involved with the Army program and even yourself covering the team for the service that is involved, literally, because this game, despite them wanting to win, it could change on a dime if they have to pull out if something happens tomorrow and if it is their priority. Obviously, football is not their priority, no matter whether they're in a conference or what their focus is on the goal of the program. They are not there to be NFL draft picks, unlike, say, players at other programs. So, again, thanks to Mitchell there. Absolutely appreciate there. You read in Mitchell's coverage for this game over there at SB Nation. Again, follow us throughout the Now family of networks, Pittsburgh Sports Now, etc. Find us on social at PGH Sports Live, at WV Sports Now here, and WV Sports Now for our coverage of the Mountaineers and across the West Virginia region. And also find us at Pittsburgh Sports Live here on YouTube. Bottom of the video, click that subscribe button and help us get our content to you. Once again, the West Virginia Mountaineers will take on the Army Black Knights in the Liberty Bowl. Army's there. They got a bowl game. So congrats to Army. That's already a win before the game's even kicked off, and it will be kicked off 4 p.m. on ESPN on New Year's Eve.